Alright, Dark Souls 2. I guess it was inevitable and also kind of long overdue to finally cover this game. I mean, I've done at least 2 walkthroughs for every other Soulsborne Sekiro titles, so it's about time I did one for the black sheep of the family. At least it tends to be regarded that way. And it is kinda true when doing SL1 in general, but especially on the higher new game cycles, because it features a lot of BS to deal with. So unfortunately, this is definitely not intended as a guide. Even though it is my inevitable style to nevertheless present it as such. But I definitely don't recommend you try this yourself. Because this is not only SL1 on NG+7, but I also limit myself to using broken straight swords. Often power stancing 2 of them. But I also don't use any stat boosting gear. And I guess you understand what that entails. That means all stats on 6, including adaptability. Meaning hardly any iframes when rolling. Because what sane people would do is to wear the peasant set, the mad warrior mask, the simpleton ring, and have the vessel shield on your back, which increases your ADP from 6 all the way to 20. Add the dexterity ring to that, so you can wield a rapier, or you can wield the homunculus mace or bandit axe even without the strength ring, and it all makes surviving on Soul level 1 a bit more manageable, as it is already way harder than in the other Souls games in my opinion. Because as you know, there are some bullshit hitboxes and sections where you get gangbanged by way too many enemies at once. So when you combine that with a lack of iframes, it leads to levels of frustrations that might cause you to run into this mythical place called Outside, where you will, randomly kick a puppy in the balls. And therefore I do allow myself to use a crossbow at times, and I also excluded the Throne Watcher and Throne Defender boss fight from the rules. So against them I do use stat boosting gear and the rapier. In fact, they are now officially my least favorite boss fight in the entire series. Meaning worse than the Bat of Chaos and Half-Light. I mean, that fight is so unbalanced and unfair that I rather eat 10 pounds of Taco Bell while having a tube connecting my asshole to my dickhole than fighting those fuckers under these restrictions. In fact, even fighting them with stat boosting gear has led me to now, wish for the entire annihilation of all mankind to instantly relieve everyone from their suffering. Oh, and Happy New Year, by the way. Bit late, but this is my first video of the year, so there you go. Okay, let's not start off by going to the Forest of Fallen Giants. After all, you have a bit more freedom if you're not in new game. However, if you've done SL1 before, you know that you cannot just equip the cat ring and expect to survive falling down to get to the gutter. Because the cat ring only reduces fall damage in this game, it doesn't negate it. So that's why I'm also wearing the Lion Warrior set, because those pieces also reduce fall damage, and it stacks with the cat ring. Regardless, you still have to fall down exactly like I do, and of course heal the damage you take on the way down, otherwise you will still die, despite all the fall damage reducing equipment. So on regular new game, on SL1, the easiest way to get to the gutter is by having Leathersmith Gilligan set up his most expensive ladder. But that of course means taking a different route first. As you know, from New Game Plus onwards, there are new enemies at specific places, and down here are 2 NPCs that you don't want to mess with. So we're going to try to avoid them. However, there are those exploding hollows down here as well. Now the first one you can quite easily take out with a crossbow. Again, I'm not completely insane that I don't allow myself to use a ranged weapon. I mean, that's fine in other Souls games, but not in Dark Souls 2. However, the other exploding hollows behind the first one sometimes are drawn by the sound of the arrows, but sometimes they just stay where they are. So, if you jump down, you really have to be careful to not get caught in their explosions while running past them. And in case you're wondering, no, alluring skulls don't work on them for some reason. You'd expect that they would, but they don't. Alright, Blighttown 2.0, or Valley of Defilement 3.0. Even with the torch you don't really see that much, and you can quite easily get stuck while trying to run past enemies, as you can see from the bloodstain. And speaking of which, this is an edited playthrough like usual, so this is mostly a compilation of the successful attempts. But other than the enemies here, of course an annoying factor in this area are the statues spitting poison. And for some reason I was so stupid that I initially didn't even equip anything to cure poison. Fortunately, poison doesn't scale with new game cycles, so you can pretty much out-heal poison by just spamming life gems, which I also didn't have equipped. So, very slow Estus animation it is. But when it comes to the enemies, the really dangerous one are the exploding hollows. In fact, even under circumstances where you can take damage, it may very well be the case that the explosion simply launches you over the edge. So, that's always nice. This game has been out for 5 years now, but you have no idea how many times I went through this game before I came to know that you can break the wall to get to a second bonfire. Actually, it's even worse than that, because not only did I miss several bonfires on my very first playthrough, but for the longest time I didn't know that there was a bonfire behind the wall after the first fog gate in the Shrine of Amana. In fact, it was already after I did a no-death run for the Illusory Ring of the Conqueror, and during a no bonfire run that I actually found it. Meaning that at that time I had no use for it. Son of a bitch. Speaking of hidden bonfires, when taking this route first, don't forget to pick up the Fragrant Branch of Yore, because we haven't met Melentia yet. And actually that is a downside to not going to the Forest of Fallen Giants first, because one of the most important items for a playthrough like this are bright bugs. And Melentia sells 3 bright bugs, and she restocks those and raises the price after beating each of the Great Ones and the Looking Glass Knight. However, if you beat one of those bosses before buying them, that entails that the 3 she had in stock before are permanently gone. And aside from a specific location in the Sunken Crown DLC, if you use a ton of bonfire ascetics, you cannot farm bright bugs. So you definitely don't want to waste them. That's also why I only use them for very specific boss fights, because there's a very real danger of running out. So for the Rotten I won't be using one. However, for the majority of the playthrough I will be in Red Tearstone range, and couple that together with Flynn Ring and the Ring of Blades +2. But as you would expect, even then my damage is kinda meh. Well, you cannot sit at the bonfire during an invasion, but I'm already in Red Tearstone range anyway, so might as well go directly to the boss. And I will show later on what the quickest method is to get in Red Tearstone range starting at a bonfire. Alright, so how do you fight the Rotten without iframes? Well, it's not true that you have no iframes at all at 6 ADP. It's just that your window of invincibility is really short. So as long as it's a really fast attack, you can still dodge through it. It's only that your timing has to be extremely strict. And that's not really something you can explain how to do. That comes from experience, and it's something you need to get a feel for. So for the Rotten, it's best to try to get behind him as much as possible. Of course, that's easier said than done. But the point is that at least initially he cannot really attack behind him, apart from his spinning slash. And that is one of those attacks that goes so quickly that it's relatively easy to dodge through. In fact, even if you dodge in the same direction as the attack is going, you may still survive. However, you need to be really careful when he's about at 50% health, because then he can do his dark AoE attack, and you pretty much have to react immediately when you see the flashing light that indicates that that attack is coming. By the way, as shit as the broken straight swords are, the one benefit they have is that the stamina consumption is extremely low. And stamina management is what an SL1 run is all about. But in Dark Souls 2 it's even more extreme, because you have very little to work with to begin with, and it regenerates extremely slowly. In fact, even the Chlorantine Ring doesn't help that much, because it's not the regeneration itself that is the problem, it's that it takes longer for regeneration to start compared to the other Souls games. So other than the low adaptability, that's one of the hardest aspects of this playthrough. Alright then, so now it is time to go through the Forest of Fallen Giants and all the way to the Lost Sinner. And as you might have noticed, I'm using broken straight swords with elemental infusions instead of a raw one. So is that beneficial for some reason? Well, nah, not really actually. It does give a slight benefit when using the right element against the right enemy. It will do slightly more damage than a raw one. But actually when using resins, raw infusion will always outclass elemental infusions. At the very least under these circumstances. So, in principle, you should definitely use raw infused ones. But I'm not gonna. Regardless, something that definitely is critical outside of boss fights is the stone ring. Because broken straight swords don't have a lot of stagger potential. But with the stone ring, you can quite effectively stun lock a lot of enemies. Especially because of the low stamina consumption, you can get a lot of attacks in. And it's even more effective when power stancing them. Although that will massively increase stamina consumption. However, even when I'm power stancing, you will often notice that I will go for R1s or that I simply will switch to two-handing one sword at a time. And in a lot of cases that is when an enemy is close to a wall. Because one of the most infuriating ways to die is when you cause yourself to stagger when hitting a wall. When you simply try to attack an enemy. Not a problem yet in the open areas of the first section, but later on it really becomes a problem. Even when an enemy is not directly against the wall. Because they take so many hits, you kind of push them against the wall, so to say. Now couple that together with tons of enemies at once, not being able to take a hit, and for the most part lacking the ability to dodge through most attacks, and this short little early game area becomes suddenly pretty tough to get through. This section is a bit of a clusterfuck if you cannot get hit, because there's a hollow shooting arrows. If you run up to him, the one on the top of the tree branch can hit you from behind with a firebomb. And once you are at the top of the stairs, you can only fight within a limited space, because there's yet another one out of reach also shooting arrows at you. So again, I'm not doing this without a ranged weapon. In fact, even with a crossbow of your own, peeking around the corner is already really dangerous. So as I said before, bright bugs are incredibly valuable in this type of playthrough. So let's make sure that Melentia ends up back in Medulla later on. And although I have more than enough souls in my inventory, only thing that matters is that I buy the 3 she has in stock before defeating the last sinner. But we need to get quite a few things done before that. So let's head towards the Pursuer and the Last Giant first. And speaking of bosses, this playthrough does not contain all boss fights, only the mandatory ones. And even then it's quite a long playthrough. Now, an interesting thing about the fact that I'm using elemental infused weapons is that it allowed me to test the actual weaknesses of enemies. Because for the most part you go by what the wikis say, and those often contradict each other. Or you just make assumptions that you never actually put to the test. For example, you would think that these hollow soldiers are weak to fire, but magic is more effective. And you think that those armored turtle soldiers later on are weak to lightning, but they are actually weaker to dark damage. And the same goes for the Last Giant, by the way. If you go by the wiki, you would think that practically nothing is weak to dark, but there are some surprising exceptions actually. It's not the case that 90% of the enemies in this game are weak to lightning and dark resistance. Well, it's close to that, but not exactly. As you can see, I'm not in hyper mode because I set at the bonfire, so let me show you how you can quickly get into hyper mode without using fall damage or whatnot. Equip and unequip the Northern Ritual Band to cut your life in half. And then use the special ability of Sir Alan's sword to drain enough health to get into Red Tearstone range. Really effective, and you don't even need the stats to wield it. I don't keep it equipped though, because remember that your equip burden determines the range of your rolls. And that's important since we are mostly not rolling through attacks, but away from them. Although I will have a higher equip burden later on in the playthrough because of fashion. Because let's face it, that's just way more important. Alright, let's clear away these barrels, because I don't want the armored turtle to blow me up. And definitely don't try to roll through this enemy's attacks. The easiest way is to simply move back and forth. You do need to be careful that he can string 4 sideways attacks together. And when he does an overhead attack, the shockwave affects your walking speed. So you might get clipped if your timing is off. And that's also why I didn't power stance, because that animation is much slower. Alright, let's try to defeat the Pursuer on top of that structure, rather than in his designated boss arena. You only get one chance though, he won't reappear there if you fail. However, that area outside the broken wall is rather dangerous because of the firebomb throwing enemy and the spear and halberd hollow on the left. So when possible, you should always try to take enemies on one at a time. Therefore I try to lure the spear hollow towards me without aggroing the halberd one. And the way I did it, before the Pursuer at least, is actually a bit too risky. Because it's safer to run back inside, as you will see me do later on. And you might not expect it, but spear hollows are actually really dangerous enemies when you cannot take damage. Because they can attack while blocking, they have a lot of reach, and it's actually quite hard to avoid their fast stab attacks when you try to bait an attack. If you're lucky though, he will simply attack with his shield or he does a sideways attack. Otherwise you have to wait for him to stab 3 times and then it's safe to counterattack. It's kind of weird that when you hit a barrel, it won't explode, but when a turtle does it, it will explode. I mean, it will explode as well if you hit it with a fire weapon, but it's not like the turtle does fire damage. Rather peculiar design choice if you ask me, but hey, it does help you out by making the turtle do damage to himself. It is cool, but crude. Okay then, the Pursuer. He's actually not that hard to fight with low ADP, because a lot of his attacks can be avoided without even rolling in the first place. Because when he charges towards you, there is no hitbox at his shield side, so you can simply run past his left side and you won't get hit. Now you can still roll if you're afraid that your spacing is off, But the point is that the hitbox is on his other side to begin with. His free hit combo either ends in a spinning attack or in an overhead attack, but in both cases you can just stay back for the first 2 attacks and then run around him. There's no need to even roll in the first place. And when his sword glows blue, just wait for the stab and then you can literally run into the sword and not get hit, because the hitbox will immediately become inactive. Which is surprising, because even though that's exactly the way it should be, if you ask me, it does not apply to a lot of bosses, where you can literally run into their weapons after an attack and still die. And that's annoying. And that's pretty much it. He can do singular attacks as well, but if you're patient, he won't give you that much trouble. And this version cannot shoot the cursed orbs, unlike the ones you encounter later on in the game, because it's not the same guy. Why exactly they named this enemy the Pursuer instead of the NPC invader Forlorn, who truly acts like a Pursuer, I have no idea. Okay, as I said, let's take a little less risk by luring the Spear Hollow inside this time. And speaking of not taking unnecessary risks, when it comes to the Halberd Hollow, the reason I two-handed my weapon rather than power stancing is because of what I mentioned earlier, that you can stagger yourself by hitting a freaking wall. It's peculiar that that can be such an issue when we all know that every From Software game has massive clipping issues. Well, anyway, after those 2 hollows there is one of those extra enemies that appear from New Game Plus onwards, and it's one with a lot of HP. So I will be switching to a poison infused broken straight sword for that one. In fact, I will be relying on poison damage quite a bit in this playthrough, because unlike Dark Souls 1 and 3, poison is actually quite usable in this game. Now it won't remain active that long, but it is an effective way to damage an enemy while you can focus on dodging or getting out of an enemy's reach, or simply do passive damage in the background. Now you cannot just attack this NPC, because he will poison right through your attacks. He can do either a 2-hit combo that starts with his dagger, another 2-hit combo where he only uses his sword, or a 3-hit combo that's sword, dagger, sword. And at the end of a combo it's safe to counterattack. Okay, let's blow up the barrels again, and then hug the wall on the left, in order that only one of the 2 hollows get aggroed, meaning that I can take them out one at a time. Unfortunately, things don't always go as planned, and sometimes you can get into a clusterfuck, and you will simply have to deal with it regardless. Spear hollows you definitely don't want to fight in groups, so you can lure them over one at a time with throwing knives. Also, I should have power stanced my weapons instead of two-handing, because if you don't keep hitting them, they will simply start blocking. And the weird thing with two-handing this weapon, same as with the broadsword, is that the second attack has less range for some reason. In fact, practically nothing at all. You simply have to be touching the enemy to hit them, and sometimes not even then. So even though it sucks for your damage output, there may be situations where one-handed R1 attacks are preferable, so you will at least hit your target. Alright, time for the last giant, and although there's not too much to say about this boss, it is easy to underestimate him, because he did manage to kill me, even though you should be used to fighting him with low ADP anyway. But of course in this case he has a lot more health, and in general the camera isn't exactly your friend. It's basically a matter of moving to and away from his feet. But what's most important is that you don't get greedy with your attacks, because the hitboxes of his stomp attacks are larger than you might expect. So get away a bit earlier than you would think to be necessary. And when he takes off his arm, you can pretty much ignore it if you stay behind him, unless you have bad RNG and he jumps away a lot. And as I said before, his weakness is dark damage. So in that sense, I suppose it's a good thing I'm using elemental infusions, because Dark Pine Resin is the only one you cannot buy, at least not on a Soul Level 1 character, because you can buy Dark Pine Resin from Falcon, and he won't even talk to you with 6 faith and 6 intelligence. Wait, what? Huh? Okay, that... I guess in Drangleic, time, space and the laws of physics are convoluted. Well, anyway. Given that the pursuer is already dead, we can just make a clear run towards the bird nest in order to get to the Lost Bastille. However, running past enemies is easier said than done, but in this game there's a ring that can be a literal lifesaver. Gower's Ring of Protection massively decreases damage you take from behind. That's what he said. What? Well, so so much in fact that you can survive a few attacks, even on level 1, while fully hollowed on Nukem Plus 7. So there are several sections in this playthrough where I will make good use of this ring. And if you add the Ring of Giants Plus 2 as well, it can also prevent you from getting staggered when you get hit. Alright, the Lost Bastille. I'm skipping the second pursuer on the left because I'm going to go back to Majula in a minute anyway to buy the bright bugs from Valencia, so I may as well buy her fragrant branch as well. Now, when it comes to these Pyromancers, even with 6 ADP, you can still dodge through their sweeping attacks because they go so fast. Still, only if your timing is spot on, of course. And even though the broken straight swords are so weak, if you have the stone ring equipped, you can just stun lock them to death because of the low stamina consumption. So even though the broken straight sword sucks ass, they are not the worst weapon in the game. They're definitely better than the broken ladle. But come on, this game is called Dark Souls, not Dark Soup. Okay, the reason I'm switching to the Lion Warrior set here is because I definitely need to be in hyper mode when fighting the Ruin Sentinels, but I also need to survive the fall from that platform. So wearing this is how you can prevent having to sacrifice a ring slot for the cat ring. Now, technically it wouldn't have made that much difference anyway, because the fourth ring I'll be using is the Chlorantine ring, which doesn't really do all that much. But it is especially something to keep in mind when you're doing an SL1 run with stat boosting gear, because then you will likely need all 4 ring slots. There's a real danger of getting hit by one soldier while fighting the other, so here's where the wide sweeping motion of power stancing comes in handy, so you can hit both enemies at the same time. Oh boy, the Ruin Sentinels are really tough under these circumstances. Not so much individually, but with this damage output, there is no way to prevent having to fight the last 2 at the same time. Fortunately, you do have more than enough time to take out the first one, as long as you can stay on the platform, of course. However, he has a tendency to drop down a lot. So that's one of the reasons I'm using poison here, so I can do damage even when he's off the platform. And it also does extra damage when I then attack him with a lightning infused one after I poisoned him. And in this fight you definitely don't want to rely on those few iframes you have, because the hitboxes are a bit wonky. Instead of being in the shape of their weapons, they are more like triangles. So when you're close to the boss, the hitbox is larger. So I'm more or less using, basing my strategy on no roll strats. It's not that I'm literally not rolling, but I'm circling around the boss to keep out of the hitboxes altogether. Even their wide sweeping attacks don't go exactly behind them. So it's mainly about trying to position yourself directly behind him and circling around him to bait his overhead attack. When the first one is dead, there is a safe spot at the very edge of the platform, and that allows you to poison the second one before the third one shows up. But then you are forced to drop down, and obviously then the hardest part of the fight starts. Without a doubt, their spinning attack is the most dangerous, because it covers a really large area, and there's obviously no possibility to dodge through that attack. You have to be completely out of the way. So you have to keep moving around the room and prevent getting stuck in the corner. And because it covers such a large area, it's very easy to get stuck in the corner. Hopefully one of them will throw their shield so you can differentiate between them, because you will want to focus on the one with the least health remaining. But regardless of how much special you are on, you must never get greedy and focus on getting single attacks in, unless you are absolutely certain that it's safe to attack multiple times. So if you have the opportunity for multiple attacks, it may be good to go for poison, because then you can drain their health while you can fully focus on avoiding them. Well, as tough as that boss fight was, it's nothing compared to the next one. With the exception of the Throne Wanker and Defecator, which is just a completely unreasonable fight, the Lost Sinner is a little less completely unreasonable fight. And that's because of the 2 Pyromancers that joined the fight on New Game Plus and beyond. Well, at least we want to see what we're doing, so picking up the key that allows us to light the fires in the boss arena is definitely crucial. Fortunately, the route towards Sinner's Rise is not that big of a deal, although you do have to act very quickly around all the exploding hollows you encounter. They only take 1 hit, so it's all about hitting them before they have the chance to explode. Definitely make sure to lure this enemy away before attacking, because remember, walls are greater enemies than enemies near walls themselves are. Okay, I phrased it really weird, but I think you know what I mean. Alright, this part is pretty fucked up, because there are 2 archers down here that almost never miss, plus several sword enemies as well. And once we go down the elevator, there's a Flexel Sentry, plus some weird monster that is new on New Game Plus, that I'm not sure is even somewhere else in the game. And exploding hollows, one of which is directly blocking your way. And because the Lost Sinner is such a messed up fight, and this is the closest bonfire, we will have to do it multiple times. So what I do is I heal up, and use Gawa's Ring of Protection and the Ring of Giants, +2, to make sure that I can run through this area, despite it being extremely likely that I will get hit. As long as I don't get hit from the front or the side, it is somewhat manageable at least. But probably the worst part is that exploding hollow that blocks your way. You will have to kill it immediately, and then immediately keep moving, because there's another exploding hollow chasing you. So yeah, this is one of those reasons why I advise against you trying this run for yourselves. Yeah, not okay, not alright. This is one hell of a frustrating fight. The Lost Sinner herself is already tougher than she looks, because her hitboxes are... I don't even really know how to explain it. Sometimes you clearly don't get hit, but it counts as a hit. And sometimes you visually do get hit. You dodge along with the sword, for example, rather than through it. And sometimes it just doesn't count as a hit. As far as I can tell, it simply lacks consistency. The only thing I can say is that you have the best chance of survival if you get to her side before the attack animation starts and then dodge. So dodging when you are almost already out of the incoming hitbox, so to speak. Now as you can see, I'm not only not in Red Tearstone range, I even have Gower's Ring of Protection equipped. And for two reasons. One, if you get hit due to the boss's inconsistent hitboxes, it often hits the back of your character, so you can still survive in that case. But more importantly, of course, is the fact that two Pyromancers will join the fight, and even though this ring doesn't protect that much against fire damage, it will give you at least the opportunity to kill a Pyromancer without the Sinner killing you from behind. Now of course the ring has limited durability, so it does have its limits as well, and the Pyromancers are nimble as fuck. And it's such a freaking mess. If you wonder why I didn't also add the Champion Covenant to this challenge, then seriously? Oh, and say goodbye to the majority of your valuable bright bucks. Okay then, that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed this video, then, well, you're probably as much of a sadist as I am a masochist. But at least consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and don't forget the notification bell. Fortunately, only certain sections of this playthrough are complete torture, so happier things are still on the horizon. Sort of, at least. So stay tuned for the next episode, and thanks for watching.